Hello, and welcome to Book Circle. I'm Earl Wyenberg. This time, we will continue our reading of Storm in the Village by Miss Reed. Miss Reed is coming back from vacation to resume her duties at school. The countryside, as I approached Fairacre on the return drive, slept peacefully in the heat. Things were getting their shabby end-of-August look. The trees were heavy and dusty, the grassy banks parched by the prolonged sunshine, and already the farmers were busy harvesting. In the fields of one or two of the smaller farms, the stooks of corns waited in neat rows for the farm carts which would take them to the ricks. But on Mr. Miller's 100-acre field, a combine harvester crawled busily along, an enormous red monster that poured the grain from its gaping mouth into a truck that drove slowly beside it, collecting the rich harvest. This was the crop that Miss Clare had watched growing beside her garden throughout the year, and the one which two strangers had studied on that spring morning, so long it seemed ago. The schoolhouse at Beech Green was shuttered, I noticed, as I drove by, and Miss Clare's little house, too. They would all be returning at the weekend, for school began on Tuesday morning. I sincerely hoped that Miss Clare's health would have benefited from the sea air and sunshine. My own house greeted me with a wonderful aroma of furniture polish. Mrs. Pringle had been left in charge of my household matters, the cat Tibby being the most important of her duties. This disdainful animal came down the stairs as I entered and greeted my own effusive cries with a glassy stare, never pausing in his progress to the garden. A bottle of milk stood on the kitchen table, and under it lay a note in Mrs. Pringle's hand. It said, "Dear Miss Reed, hope you have had a good time. Milk here, 6 eggs in safe, lettuce and tomatoes in basket, and bread in bin. Young Prince had no wholemeal, but only this Coburg white. Cat have et like a horse. Mrs. Pringle." I boiled one of the eggs for my tea, for I had made an early start and was hungry, and carried my tray into the sunny garden. How lovely it was to be back, I thought. The garden was drooping sadly in the drought, the lawn was scorched, and the garden beds were baked hard, but it still smelt fragrant and lapped me in peace, and the air from the high downs blew softly upon it all. Tibby, seeing food, approached me lovingly, and gave me at last a belated welcome. I was still sitting in the garden, reading back numbers of the Times Educational Supplement, which had piled up in my absence, when Mrs. Partridge came bearing the parish magazine. "Well, well, my dear," she greeted me affectionately. "It is so nice to see you again." "Tell me all the news," I begged, pushing a deck chair toward her. She settled herself in it gingerly. "I never quite trust them," she confessed. "As a child, I caught my finger in one once, and the nail went quite black and had to be taken off at the hospital." "Please don't tell me," I pleaded hastily. "I'm a squeamish woman, and anything like that makes my back open and shut like Mrs. Pringle's." Mrs. Partridge smiled kindly. "Then I won't tell you, my dear, for the sequel was perfectly horrid." She licked her lips ghoulishly and took a short breath. "It went septic," she began, but I cut her short. "Don't!" I protested, putting my hands over my ears. Mrs. Partridge opened her eyes very wide, and I saw her lips moving. Very cautiously, I took my hands away. "So, of course, I won't mention it again," she was saying. Breathing a sigh of relief, I put my hands back in my lap. "What's happened in Fairacre?" I pursued. "Any births, deaths, or marriages?" No, I don't think so," said the vicar's wife in a slow, considering voice. Then her eyes brightened. "But Mrs. Pringle tells me that Minnie is expecting her 4th in the new year." "Makes a nice change to have one born in wedlock," I said comfortably, closing my eyes against the sun's lowering rays. Mrs. Partridge agreed. "And the building estate?" I ventured. "Not a word more directly. We've heard that the planning committee of the county council object to the idea. It doesn't fit in with their ideas for that area any more than it does with ours, so we're all unanimous on that point. That's not to say there isn't plenty of strong feeling in Caxley and elsewhere. I suppose that the county planning people will register their objections, and then we all wait to see what happens. Almost unsettling, I said. Don't let it worry you, said Mrs. Partridge gently. She leant forward and patted my knee. Fairacre School will always be here, and you with it, I hope, for many, many years. She departed very soon after this, leaving me to relish my much-loved little house and garden, the sight of the village school awaiting the new term's activities, while her comforting words rang in my head. Chapter 17. Joseph Coggs leaves home. Joseph Coggs was locked out. The shabby wooden door of number 2 Tyler's Row, from which the faded paint was flaking fast, was firmly shut against him, and the little house was empty. Mrs. Coggs and the 2 youngest children had gone to Caxley to buy shoes for the winter, and she had forgotten, in the last-minute helter-skelter rush for the bus, to put the door key in its usual hiding place. Joseph had pelted home from school through pouring rain, had flung open the rickety gate, and heaved up the old pail which served as a dustbin by the door to find the key. It was not there. He tried the door, found it locked, shrugged his wet shoulders philosophically, and wandered down the garden path to seek shelter in the shed. This was not the first time that Joseph had found himself locked out. His mother, poor, feckless, overworked creature, all too often forgot to put the key out in the secret hiding place, and Joseph prepared now to wait for almost an hour when he knew the bus from Caxley was due back. The shed was a flimsy construction of corrugated iron sheeting, and the rain drummed relentlessly and deafeningly upon it. Joseph upturned a bucket, usually used for mixing the chicken's mash, and heavily encrusted with the remains of long-past meals, and sat himself down with his elbows on his knees and his chin cupped in his cold hands. He wondered idly where his little sisters had got to. They had set off from school a few minutes before him, but he had run past them in the lane where they were blissfully paddling in a long, deep puddle with sticks in their hands, with which they stirred the murky depths, quite oblivious of the rain which soaked their flimsy clothes. "Come on home," Joseph had directed hoarsely. "Mum won't half go on at you. Look at your shoes." The twins had scarcely spared a glance either for their brother or for their canvas-topped plimsolls, which were already hidden by the water. They had answered him boldly. "Don't care. Tell her then. Don't care," they had said tauntingly. "Don't care was made to care. Don't care was hung. Don't care was put in a pot and boiled till he was done," shouted their brother threateningly. But seeing that they took no notice, he had sped away home. Apart from the drumming of the rain above his head and the trickling of a little stream that ran in the ditch which separated Tyler's Row gardens from the field beyond them, Joseph found the shed very peaceful. It was a dirty place, but that did not worry Joseph unduly, for he was well acquainted with dirt. The floor was of hard earth, and upon it lay an assortment of objects, poor enough in themselves, but of great service to the Coggs family. A treacle tin, with a loop of wire for a handle, stood half full of creosote. Arthur Coggs had purloined this in order to do the fowl house sometime, but so far that time had not come. Strips of boxwood, which had once housed oranges and margarine, lay in a heap ready for kindling wood beside a heavy bar of iron which had once been part of Mr. Robert's harrow, but had been found by Arthur Coggs, who had prudently put it by for future use. Joseph idly turned this over and watched innumerable woodlice scurry for shelter. He picked one up, a scaly, gray little creature with its myriad legs thrashing wildly. Gently, he turned it over on his palm, fascinated to see it roll itself up into a tight ball no bigger than a goosegrass seed. It was like a miniature football with its even lines round and round it. Joseph tipped his grimy palm this way and that, watching his treasure roll. At last it rolled between his fingers to the ground. The legs reappeared as if by magic, and away the woodlouse scuttled to find its own again. It vanished beneath a sack containing dusty straw, a sack which gave forth a strong odor of dog biscuits and stale corn, which reminded Joseph of his own stomach. He rose and pulled out an ear or two from the musty wheat straw and began to roll the grains between his palms. 4 hard grains reward his labors, and he chewed them contentedly enough, his old posture with elbows on knees resumed, and his gaze fixed upon the chicken run which he could see through the open door. The bare earth there was a slimy mass of mud, starred with the marks of chicken claws. The unhappy birds stood hunched beside their rickety house, a converted tea chest. They were in an advanced state of molt, several without tail feathers, and most showing areas of pink pimply flesh here and there. They were sadly bedraggled and half-starved, but Joseph loved them. It grieved him to see them now, almost shelterless, without food, enduring the pitiless rain upon their bare backs with such humility and hopelessness. Tears sprang to his dark eyes as he looked upon these pathetic prisoners. It wasn't fair, thought young Joseph passionately, that some birds should be able to fly wherever they liked and have all the food that they could eat and be warmly wrapped in thick feathers, while others had to come out of the egg only to find a naked, hungry world awaiting them. It did not occur to Joseph that he himself could be compared with his own unhappy hens, the victim of poverty, neglect, and callous indifference, equally hungry, cold, and without shelter. He sat there as hunched as the hens beneath his glistening, ragged clothing, comforting himself by squelching his bare toes up and down inside his soaking canvas shoes, and watching the small bubbles bursting from their sides. 4 miles away, the bus from Caxley crept slowly towards Fairacre through the puddles that swirled around its wheels. Term was now several weeks old. An unusually silent and subdued Miss Jackson reigned in the infants' room, and relations between us were strained, which was not surprising. I did not blame her for resenting my intrusion into her private affairs, and I had no knowledge of her father's handling of this delicate matter after he had summarily removed her from Franklin's cottage. I had received a letter from Mr. Jackson at the beginning of term, thanking me for my care of his daughter, and asking me, in effect, to keep an eye on her movements. This letter gave me some uneasy moments, and I really wished Mr. Jackson could have quelled his very natural parental anxiety and not placed me in the dubious position of policeman. I disliked the feeling of conspiring with her father behind Hilary's back, but after some thought I decided to say nothing to her about the letter, and contented myself with a brief reply to the effect that Hilary seemed more settled. The girl vouchsafed nothing about either Franklin or Miss Crabbe, and I began to wonder whether that lady had ever written to Hilary as she said she would. I told Hilary of our encounter in Devon, of the heat and the ices, but nothing naturally of our conversation. The girl's response was offhand, and if indeed Miss Crabbe had proffered the olive branch, I began to wonder if it had been spurned. Altogether, it was being a most uncomfortable term. The heat wave had given way to a long, dreary spell of rainy weather, which meant that the children lacked fresh air and proper exercise, and were nearly as crotchety as their much-tried teachers. The one bright spot was the return to good health of Miss Clare. The 3 weeks' rest by the sea in glorious weather had restored her considerably, and she returned with a most becoming tan that showed off her white hair beautifully. Her lodger's low spirits had not gone unnoticed, but I gathered from her comments on them that the girl was genuinely more cheerful at Miss Clare's than she was in my damping presence at school. "I think her father has written a pretty straight note to Franklin," she told me, "and forbidden Hilary to see him." She paused and shook her head sadly. "But whether she does or not, I really don't know. She goes into Caxley quite often, but I can't bring myself to cross-question the child about her comings and goings. It's not really my affair at all, and I'm sure the girl has learnt her lesson now." "I hope so," I answered, "but I can't help feeling that a teaching post well away from this part of the world would be the best thing for everybody. She's a capable girl, but she needs young company. As one of a large mixed staff, she'd get her corners rubbed off and a lot of fun into the bargain. Our conversation was interrupted by some peremptory thudding at the door. On opening it, I discovered Miss Clare's imperious cat, who deigned to enter only when I had held the door aside for a full 2 minutes. After this, rather naturally, our conversation turned to happier things. But very soon afterward, an incident occurred which gave me food for thought. I had taken the car into Caxley to be overhauled after school one day, had stayed there for my tea, and caught the 6 o'clock bus in driving rain. I sat in the front of the bus, watching the raindrops course down the window in front of me. We made various stops, the driver good-naturedly drawing up near roadside cottages where he knew certain of his passengers lived. The bell tinged as we approached the long, lonely track up to John Franklin's house, and the bus pulled up in a sheet of water, milky with the chalk which had collected in its journey down the sides of the downs. A man stepped off first and turned to help his companion over the puddles. It was John Franklin, and I recognized the woman whose arm he tucked so protectively under his own. She was the same person who had accompanied him to the flower show, the barmaid from the Bell at Caxley. It was on the same wet day that Joseph Coggs had taken shelter in the shed. His sojourn there, surveying the wretched hens before him, had been a prelude to unexpected drama. Mrs. Coggs had returned from Caxley wet and cross. The shoes had cost far more than she had ever imagined, and she found that a mere 6 shillings and a few coppers remained in her shabby purse to last her until the following Saturday night, when Arthur Coggs would hand over a grudging £3 for housekeeping. The sight of her 3 older children waiting by the rickety gate and drenched to the skin did nothing to mitigate her despair. More firing needed to dry that lot of dripping clothes by the morning, she thought bitterly, as she fished at the bottom of her basket for the key. A reek of paraffin oil met her nostrils as she grated the door back over the grubby brick floor. It overwhelmed the usual aroma of the Coggs household, which was compounded of stale food, damp walls, and unwashed clothing. The oil lamp, overturned by the cat, lay across the table, its glass chimney shattered, and its precious oil seeping steadily into half a loaf of bread which had been left beside it. Another woman, facing this final blow after so many, might have sat down and wept. Not so Mrs. Coggs, who gave one piercing, hysterical shriek, dropped her basket to the floor, and set about cuffing her children out of the way to relieve her feelings. "Get on upstairs, the lot of you litnin's," she screamed. "Out of this mess till we've cleared up. Get a cloth, Joe, you great ninny, standin' gawpin'." She gave him a resounding box on the ears, which sent him reeling into the diminutive scullery where the floorcloth lay. He returned with it to the dusky room, his eyes full of tears. It wasn't that he minded the box on the ears, although it had been a particularly vicious one, but he hated to see his mother in a mood like this. His father's blusterings and heavy blows he could endure equably, for he expected him to behave that way. But his mother, that she should shout and banish the youngest ones for no fault of their own, hurt Joseph. He retrieved the bread from the floor, whilst his mother set about mopping up the oil, scolding and railing all the time. The baby, a smelly bundle still wrapped in its shawl, had been thrust into a sagging armchair and now began to wail pathetically. It was more than tender-hearted Joe could bear. He picked a piece of bread from that part of the loaf which was still free from oil, stepped across his mother's swirling floorcloth, and handed it to the baby. He himself was now faint with hunger, and hoped under cover of the darkness, which was gathering quickly, to break himself a piece too. But his luck was out. Whether he stood accidentally on his mother's hand, or whether she jerked her arm and overturned him, Joseph never knew. But he heard a scream of rage and found himself falling toward the chair. He hit his head with a crack, while behind him his mother, beside herself this time, let fall a torrent of yelling abuse. For Joseph, as for his poor tormented mother, this was the breaking point. Confused images of the unhappy innocent hens, of his equally innocent and helpless younger brothers and sisters, floated before him. Not fair, not fair, rang in his dizzy head. His mother might be cold, might be hungry, might be sad. Weren't they all? Weren't they all as wretched, sunk in the same deep pit? And more than that, he and the little uns and the hens were small, weak, had to do as they were bid. They couldn't even answer back like the grown-ups could. He struggled to his feet. He felt as though he were battered by his mother's shouting, the baby's wailing, the snufflings of his frightened sisters, and his own intense hunger and dizziness. He lurched unsteadily toward the door. "Don't you go out," warned his mother. "There's plenty for you to do here, and you've ruined enough clothes for today." Her voice grew shriller as she saw the child wrench the door open. "Where are you going?" she screamed. "I'm clearing out of here," growled Joseph, and ran out thankfully into the pitiless rain. Chapter 18. The Public Inquiry. Fairacre tongues wagged busily one Monday morning early in October. 3 notices had appeared in the village. One was fastened to the wire grill in Mr. Lamb's post office, another was displayed by the bus stop, and the third was fixed to the notice board outside the village hall. The notice had been issued by the Caxley Rural District Council, and it announced that the Ministry of Housing and Local Government had a fixed date for a public inquiry into the proposed plans for a housing estate to be built in that area, following the objections already received to the said scheme as put forward by the County Council. "I'll bet Mrs. Bradley got summat to do with this," said Mr. Willett sagely to me. "There's been talk down at the Beetle, and more in Caxley, about her harrying the planning committee and with tales of Dan Crockford, and some other chap's got a bee in his bonnet about them downs." He knitted his brows in an effort to remember, and tossed a small screwdriver thoughtfully from one horny hand to the other. "Lor, I'll forget my own name next," said Mr. Willett, exasperated with his own shortcomings. "But he comes from some lot that keeps all on worrying about beauty spots and old monuments and that. Begins with a C." I looked at him blankly. "Not C of E," he explained, throwing the screwdriver even faster, "but that sort of thing." "CPRE?" I hazarded. "Council for the Preservation of Rural England?" "Ah, that's it," said Mr. Willem triumphantly. "I'll bet he's there, and old Miller, of course, and someone from the office about the schools." He checked suddenly and put the screwdriver in his pocket. His expression grew embarrassed. "If this did come, God forbid," he said more slowly, "would you feel like staying on, Miss Reed?" I looked from the massive brass and mahogany inkstand to the wheeling rooks that I could see through the Gothic windows. "I'd feel like staying on," I said. And we shall listen in on the council and look in on Joseph Coggs next time.